So for this edition of Honored Metal, we're going to be talking more doom and gloom. No band better fits the definition of a gothic metal band than Type O Negative. This is the 20th anniversary edition of World Coming Down, their 5th studio album. This one was originally released in 1999 towards the end of the year, September 21st, I believe. But this new 20th anniversary edition came out March 20th of 2020. And what's interesting about that, although the original was released on Roadrunner Records, this company, Run Out Groove here, was responsible for this because in 1999, nobody was really buying albums anymore. They're pretty much just buying CDs. So this album didn't come out on LP until this one here. And Type O Negative is one of those bands that's not necessarily everyone's cup of tea, and much like Rush, as we discussed last time, I didn't have the easiest time getting into them. When I first heard them, I kind of thought, who the hell gave Count Dracula a microphone? I didn't really get the whole gothic thing, the whole vampiric sound, his voice being so low. Just really wasn't my taste at first, but after giving it some time, I actually really got into their music quite a bit. If there's one issue that I still have a little bit of a problem with to this day, and it's just me being nitpicky, it's the low end on this album. Pete Steele, the bass player and vocalist, is known for distorted bass tone, which anyone who knows about sound production or playing bass guitar should know that once you add distortion to your bass, all that bottom end is gone. And this album and all of their albums actually just don't have the same kind of low end, whereas a lot of great bass players who like a distorted sound have figured out that you can run two channels and run a clean channel and a distorted, keeping your buzziness and your low end all at the same time. Now, obviously, these guys are accomplished musicians. They know what they're doing, and this was just their chosen sound. And that's cool. I don't have a huge issue with it. It's just that when you hear it next to bands that are really well produced and you put this one on, it kind of feels like everything on here is just all mid-range. But other than that, Type O Negative just has a really cool, unique sound that really sounds like no other band. You really know who you're listening to the minute you hear their sound. Coming up in the 90s and having that gothic sound, they probably appealed to a lot of people who were really into the whole Anne Rice Interview with the Vampire kind of thing that was going on at the time. So before we get into this specific album, let's talk a little bit about the band's history. Type O Negative was formed in 1989 in Brooklyn, New York, and if you ever hear these guys talk, it's obvious where they're from. As I said, Pete Steele was a guy who kind of put it all together. He was known for being in the band Carnivore, which is a more thrash, speed metal kind of band that came before then. And I guess he just felt the need to get a little bit more slow and low, which Type O Negative definitely fits that definition. Joining him was Kenny Hickey on guitar and also doing some of the vocals. Josh Silver, who's their keyboardist and also became their producer. And originally, drummer was Sal Abrascato, and he was later replaced about halfway through their career by Johnny Kelly. Only 2 years after form, they were signed to Roadrunner Records and put out their first album entitled Slow, Deep, and Hard. I assume they were talking about their sound, but then again, knowing this band, probably a little bit of both. Second album after that was Origin of the Feces, but it was their third album that was a real breakthrough and success for them. This was Bloody Kisses. In the 1990s, anybody would have bought an album with two hot chicks making out on the cover. This album actually got them a decent amount of airplay with two of their songs, Christian Woman and Black Number One. Both of those had to be shortened down quite a bit in order to be radio friendly. Black Number One also got a lot of airtime and notice by being part of America's favorite rock critics at the time, Beavis and Butthead. They of course both ridiculed and praised them on the show, and any publicity is good publicity, and I guarantee you that they got a lot of notice just from being on that show. Bloody Kisses was not only a big hit for them, but it was a big hit for Roadrunner Records, as for both of them, it was their first certified platinum album. You gotta imagine Roadrunner probably had to roll out the red carpet after that, thinking big things were coming for this band. The album that followed Bloody Kisses was what many Type O Negative fans, including myself, would consider their grand opus, October Rust. This is an absolutely beautiful album. Unfortunately, it didn't do as well in the numbers, and actually, although it did go certified gold eventually, in the length of time that took for Bloody Kisses to go platinum, October Rust had only sold 300,000 copies. Considering the problems they were starting to have with the record sales, both the band and the label started to think that maybe the world was coming down. That's where the title came for the fifth album. We'll get back to this one in a minute. Following World Coming Down would be their last album with Roadrunner Records, which was Life Is Killing Me, which did have at least a little bit of airplay with the song I Don't Want to Be Me. Their final album, Dead Again, would be released on SPV America. Sadly for the band and the fans, Pete Steele died of heart failure on April 14th, 2010. Odd side note, although I don't usually remember where I hear about different band members or musicians dying, for some reason this one does stick in my mind. Maybe just because of the odd circumstance, but I was actually with my kids at Disney World in line for the Haunted Mansion. I don't know what that means, but it was just a terrible way to enjoy a day at the park, reading on my phone that Pete Steele had just died. Anyway, let's actually talk about this album, World Coming Down. This was their first album to make it into Billboard Top 40, actually debuted at number 39, also another first for Roadrunner Records. Now it's considered to be their darkest album, which is kind of an odd thing to say when you think about Typo Negative. I mean, their stuff is all very dark and vampiric and depressing. Nothing about it is really light in any of their albums, so kind of weird to think that this would be considered their darkest, but it has a lot to do with the situation that Pete himself, as well as some of the other bandmates, were in at the time. As I said before, they were having a hard time coming down from a very long tour on October Rust, trying to boost up the record sales, and really just wasn't happening for them. On top of that, both Pete and Kenny had developed habits with cocaine and alcohol abuse, and a lot of that is reflected actually in the lyrical content as well. And then to top everything off, Pete was dealing with the tragedy of deaths in his family, several members actually, including his father, right before it was time to start writing. According to the guitarist Kenny Hickey, typically Pete would come into rehearsal when it came time to work on new albums and would have an entire album already laid out ready to go as far as a skeletal version, and allow the bandmates to kind of add their parts to it. This time, however, when it came time to do this album, he had absolutely nothing prepared. The bandmates actually talked about how they had to go and pick him up and kind of force him to come to band practice. So this album marks the first time that the band as a whole actually wrote all of the music together at rehearsal. Apparently when it came time for lyrical content, Pete wasn't really feeling very inspired, and it was up to Kenny to tell him, look, you're in a depressive rock band and you're currently in a depressive state. Why don't you use that and write about what you're dealing with now? And that's basically what he did, so that's why you have what's considered a very dark album. Now, one of the things I would like to note is that one of the things that brought me around to really liking this band is they like to use some twisted, dark humor every now and then. They're kind of known for that. In fact, I do recall them opening for Motley Crue in the mid-90s, and this was the time when Motley Crue didn't have Vince Neil in the band. John Corabi was actually singing for them, and they were on tour with Typo Negative opening. Of course, Motley Crue's crowd is kind of a party crowd, and so they weren't really digging watching Typo Negative, and Pete would use that as a chance to talk to the audience about saying things like, we're your punishment for coming early, or if you don't like our music, just thank our booking agent Vince Neil. So little jokes like that kind of made me chuckle, and that's the kind of thing that also helped me come around. That's an important thing to remember when it comes to the track listing. So let's talk about the actual songs on this album. Track number 1 on this album is called Skip It, and this was one of those times where they tried to use their humor, and they did this before with the October Rust album. On October Rust, they opened up the album with a song called not really a song, a track called Bad Ground, in which you find out that it's basically what a guitar amp sounds like when you got a chord with a background plugged into it, that buzzing sound. So on this album, The opening track on a CD was called Skip It, and it basically just sounds like a CD skipping, and it's followed by Kenny shouting, "You're a sucker." Now, interesting side note is they did have cassettes and they were prepared for records, so they actually do have recordings for each media that you listen to. It's different for track one. The CD sounds like a CD skipping, of course. Cassette tape sounds like your cassette getting eaten up by the tape player. All those old people know what that sounds like. And then, of course, the record sounds more like, a skipping record. So anyway, that's track one. The first actual song on this is called White Slavery. White Slavery basically has to do with Pete's addiction to cocaine. It starts with the kind of almost churchy sounding organ, and then it goes very much into the typical slow, dark rhythms of Type O Negative. And track 3 on this album is one of 3 soundscapes on this particular album. Now, Type O Negative is known for using soundscapes in their albums as well. It's usually just a small track that has, sound effects of different kinds that kind of enhance your listening experience in between songs. If you listen to the Bloody Kisses album, you hear different soundscape tracks with moaning nuns and babies crying and weird stuff like that, right? So on this album, the soundscape tracks have to do with organs in the body that are a gateway to how one of these guys might have died had they continued with their substance abuse. So the tracks that are on this that are soundscapes are called Sinus, one is called Liver, and one is called Lung. Sinus has to do with, of course, snorting cocaine. As we said, Pete had this addiction. And in the track, you will hear someone snorting, and then you'll hear a heartbeat that starts to speed up, of course, and then someone screaming. Now, after this album was produced, Pete went on to say that he could not listen to this track anymore because it just sounded a little too real to experiences that he'd had in the past. Track number 4 is one of their first singles, and this was called Everyone I Love Is Dead, and fitting to what he was going through at the time. Obviously, this is Pete's way of dealing with the loss of different family members.
Everyone I love is dead. Everyone I love is dead.
The track number 5 on this album is called Who Will Save the Sane. That's a kind of a cool bass walk kind of a groove to it, and basically is a song that has to do with mental illness and obviously times that Pete has probably had to deal with the psychiatrist. Number 6 is another of the soundscapes. This one's called Liver. Basically has to do with, of course, alcohol. Track number 7 is the title track, World Coming Down. This obviously has a lot to do with just basically depression and how he's feeling bad about things going wrong in his life. This has a very Beatles-esque kind of feel to it in parts, and in fact this actually includes a sitar and a tambura in the recording as well. Track number 8 is called Creepy Green Light. It was actually originally called Spooky Green Light, and for whatever reason at the very last minute they decided to change it to Creepy Green Light. This is an unusual kind of song because it actually has to do with basically standing at the foot of the grave of a woman that he loves and basically trying to bring her back from the dead. So not unusual for Type O Negative and Gothic. Sticking with the theme, more death, with track number 9 is Everything Dies. Track number 10 is the last soundscape on the album, and it's entitled Lung, and this is basically the sound of a respirator, and you hear someone crying in the background. Number 11 is Pyretta Blaze, and this is a song that has to do with, I guess, Pete's sexual fantasy with fire, or maybe with a pyromaniac, I don't know, but they're definitely no strangers to, I guess, sexuality in their music, and so that's what this song has to do with. Track number 12 is called All Hallows Eve. Now this actually is very similar to the Creepy Greenlight song in the sense that it has to do with standing at a woman's grave and wanting her to come back. The difference is this time he's making a deal with Saint Lucifer, and it does have a little bit more of a, I don't know, I guess somewhat upbeat feel to the song. Now they close out the album with a cover. Type O Negative is known for doing covers, and true to being Gothic, I guess, they're one of the only bands out there who do old covers slower than the original every single time. These guys have done covers from Seals and Croft, they've done Black Sabbath, they've done Jimi Hendrix, they've done Neil Young, they've done Santana, and on this album they do a medley of Beatles songs. It's the Day Tripper medley.
Got a good reason for taking the easy way out now. She was a day tripper, the one-way ticket, yeah. It took me so long to find out, and I found out.
The medley features Day Tripper, If I Needed Someone, and She's So Heavy all in one song. Now what's interesting is these guys had, like I said, they have plenty of experience in doing cover songs, but although they knew that you have to pay for the rights to record these songs and to release them, more importantly, I guess they didn't know that Beatles songs were some of the most expensive songs. One Beatles song cost $25,000 to have the rights to record, and this is a medley of 3 songs, so $75,000 it cost if they wanted to include this on their album. Now, of course, once they recorded it, they thought, this is kick-ass, we gotta have it, and apparently they had a lot of back and forth with the record label. Once the label said, hey, do you realize how much this costs? We're not gonna pay for this. And somehow Josh Silver actually talked them into it, so I guess he also had management skills on his side as well. Other than that, other things to know about this album is that Everyone I Love Is Dead was used in a soundtrack for a movie called Faust, Love of the Damned. Now the album cover, as you can see, is it's just actually a photograph of the Brooklyn Bridge, and they just went with the whole green theme. Now, if you know anything about Type O Negative, green is a major part of their theme for the band. I'm not sure why you name yourself after a blood type and go with green, but maybe they just thought that that's what they looked best in. I don't know, but they use green a lot in obviously all their album covers and often in their wardrobe. So yeah, it wasn't too hard to just take a photograph of the Brooklyn Bridge and kind of edit it a little bit to go with the green theme. One of the things the band did with the credits is they like to play with some of the wording on it, as like I said, part of their dark humor. So for example, it lists art direction as art misdirection, or songs composed by, I would say songs decomposed by, and in fact their road crew is listed as immoral support on here. On the inside here, you've got this nice little gatefold here, the picture of the band, and then this album does not come with lyrics. What it does come with is basically a little bit of a story, a small biography about this particular album. So it does talk about, having a hard time dealing with Pete dealing with some of his substance abuse and that sort of thing on here. So that's kind of interesting. Like I said, this is the first time that this is even put on an album, so that's pretty cool. The only other extra thing that this came with, I'll pull this out here, it's pretty much just similar to the inside cover there, but it comes with this poster. So there you go. If you're a poster type, this comes with the poster. And then the other thing that comes with this, as far as the vinyl itself, is naturally you got to go with the band theme. So this is the green vinyl, and I believe that is Blood Cells in the center of the album there. So now they're green blood cells. So anyway, so that's pretty interesting. It's a nice package altogether. Like I said, it's really cool to have this, considering that it's never actually been released on vinyl before. So Type O Negative, again, it's not everybody's cup of tea, but there's a lot of really great music here, and I think once you learn to kind of maybe get past the Count Dracula on the vocals there, after a while you start to really appreciate what he can do with his voice. It's actually quite a bit. Definitely worth the purchase, and I'd like to see what they're going to put out, some of the other stuff like this, some of the albums that come after this. So anyway, that is it for this particular edition of Honored Metal. Let's get back to the show.
You're watching Medal of Honor. One day, the dark horse will come.